And let me pull your intro up. I've got what Marcella sent. So I'll read that.
I'm going to take this off.
Unfortunately, ugly divorce situations. Right. Yeah. And then once we're done, I'll stop recording. I'll download it. I'll clip it so it's just the good part in the middle, not this chatting part. And then I'll get it to you.
That's right.
Yeah.
Zoom automatically does that, and I sometimes forget that.
Yeah.
You have to start recording. I have 2 different platforms, and Marcella helps me. But does this one automatically record?
I have it set to not automatically.
Oh, okay. Well, it is recording. I do see.
Yeah. So I have to remember to click it when I'm doing these things versus like mediation, which I shouldn't record.
Gotcha.
Okay. So you ready? Okay. So
actually, hang on. I'm going to do this.
Yeah, I'll let you do that.
Get that glare out from behind me by blocking it somewhat with my head. Okay.
Let me hide the Xbox with my head there. I've got the books and the plant over here, and then like toys over there.
I've got the oh, now you can see all that mess in the corner. Okay, I'm just gonna. There we go.
Yeah. I know, it's so crazy. Okay. I'm Tracy Gould-Sheinin with Clarity Mediation, and today I've got with me Lisa Decker. She is a certified divorce financial analyst and a real estate collaboration specialist in divorce. She's the CEO and founder of Divorce Money Matters and DivorceTown USA, of which I am a member. She is also the author of the book, How to Divorce Your Spouse, Not Your Money, and that's available on Amazon. Lisa devotes herself to divorce financial planning services for her clients across the country with coaching, consulting, and full analysis options done on a flat fee basis, which is great. In her practice, Lisa has seen it all, the good, the bad, and the unfortunate ugly, which happens sometimes in divorce situations. And she strives to help her clients find smarter solutions for their family, their finances, and their future. And I am so glad that you are here chatting with me today because I think CDFAs are so very helpful for folks going through divorce. They just really, working with someone like you gives my clients so much useful information that it allows them to go from like sort of not knowing what the heck to do to being able to make wise decisions for themselves, through their divorce, for their future, for their kids. It's just really a wealth of invaluable information. And I want more people to know about this designation of financial work. So I'm so glad you're here, and I would love for you to talk more about it so people know.
Thank you so much, Tracy. And I appreciate that you've invited me here today to share some important information because CDFAs tend to be the best kept secret in the industry, and that's really a shame because when you combine the emotional support and the legal and the mediation support along with the financial support, people tend to have a much better outcome.
Yeah.
What I find is that the finances, divorce is about the kids and the finances, right? And the finances part of it is really the most confusing, overwhelming, difficult part to deal with. And when you have someone who understands the finances of divorce, which are very different than, typical financial planning, they can help you make wiser decisions, as you said. And that can be everything from, the best way to divide things on down to avoiding credit issues and dealing with health insurance and all kinds of matters. So thank you again for having me here today.
Sure, of course. And, even the most like on top of it money people. Often in a marriage, you've got one person who manages the family finances. They pay the bills, they see what's coming and going, but they don't always know what sort of the big picture long-term impact of different decisions are going to be. You know, in the best circumstance, you've got a couple who works together really well and full transparency, and they work with a financial planner and they've got it all together. But even those folks don't know the impact of divorce. So when you're separating your assets or dealing with debt, and like you said, credit issues, how are you supposed to know this stuff if you've never done it before? And even if you have, it's really overwhelming for folks.
Yeah.
So when folks come to you, what sort of a typical client that might come to you? What sort of state are they in? What kind of questions do they have?
Well, I work with a wide variety of folks, but the majority of my clients are what we call gray divorce clients. And those are people who are over the age of 50 and have been in long-term marriages. And that is honestly the largest growing segment of the population getting divorced. A lot of people aren't aware of that. The term gray divorce was coined by a group of sociologists at Bowling Green University who have studied this for a long period of time. And these folks have more complicated matters because they have more assets typically. Sometimes they have more debts as well. And more complicated matters because they may have pension plans to analyze and value. They may have businesses. Just far more complicated matters than those who are obviously younger and just starting into their working years and earning years. And, our stages of life are very different, obviously.
Yeah, and they're closer to retirement, obviously. So dividing your retirement, whatever it is, pension, 401k, investment accounts is kind of more critical because you've got sort of less time to correct any mistakes.
And less time to earn more money. So, this is what's going to basically carry them through for the rest of their lives in many cases. So, yes, it's very critical that we look at all the underlying aspects. And so we're going to analyze all the assets, all the debts, basically, what do you own? What do you owe? What may be owed to you? How's the best way to divide it up? We can't take things like cars and homes and physical assets and divide them down the middle. It just doesn't work. So how do we offset if someone wants to stay in the home, for instance, and isn't able to qualify for a mortgage? How do we offset that in a way that is equitable and tax affected in another type of asset? So these are the critical things that we look at to strive for an equitable division, at least in the state of Georgia here, and most states are equitable division states, so that both parties get a fair outcome. Also, many times if we have a spouse who has been the stay-at-home spouse, and that isn't always the wives, but most of the time it is, how do we help them because they haven't been depositing into retirement accounts to make sure that they have something to fall back on? We will look at complicated pensions. Not all pensions are divisible. So that needs to be determined up front. And how can we save on quadro fees? A quadro is a legal document that has to be filed with the plan administrator and accepted. And how can we make sure that that does pass the muster of the plan administrator, but also save on quadro fees, because that can get very expensive. And so sometimes we can, juggle things around so that we can make sure you're still getting the same amount, but not having to quadro every single account there. So there's a lot of things that go into our underlying analysis. Debts are another one. Just because your spouse or your ex-spouse, soon to be ex, has been ordered to pay a particular credit card, a joint card, or the mortgage or the car payment or something like that, doesn't mean that the creditors are bound by the terms of your settlement agreement. And so if they don't pay their obligation according to the settlement agreement, you're still going to be on the hook for it if your name is on it. So we also look at how do we divorce those joint debts prior to the marriage being ended, because once that's over, it's much more complicated. So we're we're looking at the long term. What can we see in our forecast that we can help you avoid? It's so many things that many people who aren't divorce financial planners, is a CDFA, by the way, is a certified divorce financial analyst, and we do financial planning in divorce specifically. And, we're looking at things that, like I said, traditional financial planners may not be aware of. Even attorneys don't have the specialized training. And so we want to help facilitate the things that are important, these underlying issues, so that people don't end up with what I call the common, costly, and sometimes permanent mistakes.
Yes, and those are awful for folks that don't realize it until they're that much further down the road. And now, how do you revisit and recalibrate? Especially if you're already divorced and maybe you aren't even speaking to each other anymore. It may not be possible to recalibrate. And there's so many. Not so many, but they're big, like sort of ugly surprises or unpleasant surprises with divorce and money. You mentioned quadros, qualified domestic relation orders. Most of my clients have never heard of that, of course, and don't know that it's going to be required. And then, like you said, it's a whole separate process and there are fees associated with it. And then the really smart thing to do is to explore all of that before things are finalized, so that it all goes in the pot of conversation together, so that both parties feel like they're getting that equitable balance at the end, instead of like somebody saying like, well, you're going to pay for the quadro, right? We're like, wait, what? And then it ends up taking longer and costing more than you anticipate.
Right. Absolutely. Excuse me. All of these things should be looked at the onset. And the earlier you can do these things, the more time you give your professionals to help you, the better off you're going to be through the process. Because you may find this, Tracy, people typically come to me in two ways. They've either been thinking about this for a long time, and now they've been served with divorce paper. Maybe they've been hit out of the blue with it as well, but they've been served with divorce papers, and they're overwhelmed and don't know what to do. And they sometimes put their head in the sand, their fingers in their ears, this isn't happening. And then at the last minute going, oh my gosh, I really can't stop this freight train. I've got mediation next week. Can you help me? And that's not the best way to get a good outcome, because you're not leaving the divorce financial professionals you're working with enough time to do the thorough analysis that this takes. We give our clients an initial 30-day period to gather their documents, enter their data in our divorce software, answer questions, go back to other professionals. We may have them consult with a mortgage broker to see, what do we need to know about pre-qualifying to purchase the home from your spouse? If you are agreeing to that in a divorce situation and you haven't been pre-qualified, you may be setting yourself up for failure. And now you're going to be in contempt of your divorce orders and find yourself back in court afterwards. I've been brought in on cases where I was not the initial person. They didn't work with a CDFA to begin with. And I've been brought in to figure out things after the fact when what they agreed upon doesn't work, and one spouse wants to hold them to it and the other spouse is saying, I can't make this work. And now they've spent more after the divorce fighting things than they would have, than they did initially. And they would have saved a lot more money if they had just had all these underlying things looked at first.
And what did Melinda Gates say this week? Something to the effect of divorce is not something you want to waste money on.
Right, exactly. And it costs a lot of money. The average divorce in America is $15,000 to $25,000 per spouse going the traditional litigated route now. And that's an uncomplicated, uncontested, many times, just we need to figure this out and get through the discovery and all that. This is a more civilized divorce, but people don't realize that going into it.
Right.
And, if you end up fighting with each other and then going to court, you're possibly looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars. And it's astounding.
Yeah.
And letting a judge or a jury who are basically strangers decide things for you. So I am a huge proponent of mediation, amicable divorce processes. You know, this is a far better way to go for your wallet, for your sanity, for your family, even
Yeah.
more so. And the
Yeah.
other thing I wanted to say before I forget my thought, I kind of went off there, but so people come in and they either, you know, drag their feet or they want it over with right away.
Yeah.
I just want to be divorced. I just want this over with. I hear that so many times. Those are the words. I just want this over with as quickly as possible, and just let them have what they want because I want out. And then later on come back and say, I really regret that. Now I realize the reality of what I have to live on and what mistakes I made in this process. So, you know, start early, but and manage your emotion. I call it the SMART formula. S is for start early. M is for manage your emotions. A is for assess your options, because there's different ways to go about this process. R is for reach out for help, because the T is for it takes a team. This is not a one-person show. Getting divorced really does take a team.
I love that. I love that. That's great. That's so good. It's so true. And it's hard for people who are in that emotional overwhelm to understand, because you're dealing with so much, to understand how important it is to do those things, in particular, build a team. I think there's an initial thought of, well, I'm trying to save money. I don't want to spend a lot. And you know, and I'm saying, well, here's my fee. And I really think you need to hire a financial person. And yep, you need legal advice and maybe some therapy, you know. And so I'm trying to encourage them to build a team so they have all the support they do. And they're thinking, and I really only wanted to spend a couple $1,000s. And I'm like, oh, but if you don't take care of it now, it could get worse. And I really don't want that for folks.
Well, you know, if they start with, you know, a more amicable process, typically the fees are going to be lower to begin with because you're not going to go through this long litigated process. And so if you understand these options that we're talking about, whether you start with, you know, I have people who come through me, they start with me and do the financials first, working with a couple, right? You can settle out and figure out that. And then if, you know, if they can't get everything done, hey, let's bring in the mediator. Let's do that. Let's also bring in the attorneys because we need to know the answers to the legal questions. And of course, please be talking to therapists through this whole process. There's people who start with mediation and need the financial support in the midst of that. There are people who start with the amicable divorce and go the opposite direction, but we're still mixing in the same people. And then there's people who start with putting the kids first, I call it. I have a roadmap. So, you know, we put the kids first, they get the therapist to do, or a mediator or someone to do the parenting plan, taking the kids out of the equation, and therefore they can't be used as pawns in the rest of the negotiations, and then taking care of the other steps. So there's not a one way to go through this. We all think of the traditional litigated way, and sometimes people come into that thinking, well, I'm going to do this peacefully, but once a spouse receives a letter from an attorney and, you know, all this discovery response request, it can be overwhelming if they don't understand what they're getting into. So these different types that we're talking about here have pros and cons. Everybody needs to figure out what works best for them, but you know, assess those options up front. It'll really help you through this whole process. What works best for your particular situation?
Yeah, that's great advice. And one thing I wanted to ask you about before I forget is, do you usually work with both spouses, or do you sometimes work with one if the other one isn't ready to play ball? How does that work out?
I can work with clients both ways, but I do tell clients up front, if you can get your spouse to come to the table for an initial consult and let me explain the pros and cons of things, of these different options, it will help them to understand also what it could look like down the road if one or the other of you Mr. and Mrs. Smith sitting in front of me, picks an attorney who is not of the similar settlement mindset, because that can blow up your case and it can cause things to go in a direction that neither of you ever intended purposefully. So the other thing I find is that, someone may come in to see me individually, learn about this information, and say, I think I'll just hire you to help me, and then maybe later on bring my spouse. The problem that I found with that, and I have done that over the years, and sometimes I still will, but the problem with that is if you don't engage your spouse from the beginning, I can put together, a really great analysis and present something that is fair and equitable to both, but when they haven't been engaged in the process themselves, they don't trust.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to go back and build that trust when this whole thing has been laid out before them without their input.
Yeah.
And so I try to encourage clients to work together from the beginning, whether it's with your financial advisor or your mediator or your parenting coordinator, whoever you're working with. Try to work together through this process. You're going to have a far better outcome with every aspect that we've talked about.
Yes. Yes. That's great advice. That's great advice. And kind of a perfect way to end, really. Work together as best you can for your own sake. You're going to be separate soon enough. It's sort of like you got into this marriage together. We assume that you were in love at one point and you had some good times. Things have changed, obviously. Maybe wrap it up in a good way so that it doesn't get worse, which it certainly can. Yeah.
I will also add to that, Tracy, to remind people, especially if they've had children, whether they're small children or adult children, they've got to go on with their lives, and they still most likely want both parents in their lives. You don't want to put your children in the middle of things, and how you behave through your divorce is going to have a tremendous impact on your family for years to come. Do you want to be the reason that they feel uncomfortable at their own wedding because they have to figure out how to seat mom and dad so that they won't be throwing daggers at each other, or their graduations or events with grandchildren? If you have children, you'll still be tied together because of that. And we are about preserving families as well. The family unit may look different. It may become, multiple units, but divorce doesn't have to destroy families.
Agree. It can be done well so that they do maintain a semblance of an amicable relationship beyond the divorce. It's so important when they have the kids. Yeah, I agree. That's good. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. Again, it's so important that folks know, and I think it's an underknown, is that a word? An underknown thing that CDFAs exist. So I'm glad that we can get the word out.
Thank you. May I give some information?
Yes, please. How do people reach you?
I have 2 websites, and I offer free gifts on these sites. So please feel free to avail yourself. At DivorceMoneyMatters.com, there is a free divorce financial fitness kit that will give you a list of all the documents you need to gather, an actual spreadsheet, questions to ask when you're interviewing an attorney, and an ebook with more information. And that's at DivorceMoneyMatters.com. And then we have our community of like-minded professionals that you are a member of, and I'm so proud to have you there, at DivorceTownUSA.com. And there you can download the free divorce roadmap and navigational guide.
That's great. Those sound invaluable, and I'm going to go check them out today myself.
Please do.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you. That's great. So DivorceMoneyMatters.com and DivorceUSA.com.
Yes, DivorceTown USA.
DivorceTown USA. I should know that.
Thank you so much, Tracy. This was.
You're great. Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Keep up the great work. This is fun and very, very helpful to the community.
Yes, I hope so.